Hello and welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. And the subject today is one that just when I was compiling the information and talking to people who generally know what's going on in the world, I found that there was an amazing lack of knowledge about the whole Windrush and children of the Windrush generation, as well as not not having connected the dots in a way between what was going on in Great Britain and what's going on here in the United States in relationship to the whole idea, the whole thing about so-called illegal immigrants. Um, I need to go back a little bit first and look at something. You know, there was a saying back in the day that the sun never sets on the British Empire. And as we look at this graphic right here of a world map in the 1920s, it says the British Empire in the 1920s. And as you can see from one side of the map to the other, those areas in red are considered to be British territories and part of the British Empire. Now, this always fascinates me in that a lot of people think Great Britain is huge, but even if you look at this map right here, where is Great Britain? Well, Great Britain is tiny. It's tiny. Um, I guess you could find it if you look on the map, the little bitty tiny area. Okay, on this map it has Irish Free State. Okay, um, because Great Britain itself is tiny. So the idea that it controlled these huge territories. Look at Canada. See, most people don't realize Canada is part of the British Empire. There's French Canada, and there's British Canada. And then you look at Africa, and you look at Australia, different areas. Now, what had happened was in World War II, Europe was fighting Europe was fighting itself, because that's what I call it. Germany was trying to take over the known world, and so he was dominating Europe. After World War II, England or Great Britain was so devastated in terms of people that they had lost that because they lost a lot of people, right? So they needed workers. And what do the Europeans always do when they need workers? They look to black people. Now, what they did was they created what they called an opportunity. And what they said was that they put advertisements in all over the Caribbean. And they said, look, hey, Miss Drea, good to see you. They said, look, you can come over to the United Kingdom. Understand the United Kingdom, we call it the UK, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, same thing, all of that. And you can come over here and work. Okay, it's an opportunity. Of course, now check this out. This is an ad. You had to buy your ticket. There was the cabin class, which was what, 48? I guess that's 48 pounds. And then there was troop deck, which is 28 pounds. Now understand that the ship, the Empire Windrush, was a former troop ship. Okay, and they said, okay, it's going to be sailing about the 23rd of May. The Royal Mail Lines Limited. So they put these ads all throughout the Caribbean, and oh, they picked up lots and lots of people who are ready to go, ready to go. Now here's a map showing the oh, hey, Shaka 64. I'm glad you're able to get here. So now in May to June, it set out in May, and it went through these stops. Okay, Trinidad on the 20th of May. Then it went to Jamaica. Then it went to Mexico, Tampico, Mexico, and it went to Havana, Cuba, and then to Bermuda, and then by June 21st, roughly a month, it docked in Essex, England. Okay? Now, let's look at something here. When they started out May 20th in Trinidad, they got 194 passengers there. Then they went to Kingston, Jamaica, the 27th. They got 599 passengers there. Then they went on to Tampico, Mexico. They got 66 passengers from there. And then they went to Bermuda, and they got 168 passengers. So they had a total of 1,027 passengers total going on to Essex, to Tilbury Docks. Now, what I did some checking, this did not include children under the age of, I think it was 12. Okay, so they had more than 1,027, but they only counted the adults. Okay, so they get there, and well, let's talk about some things that of course. Oh, by the way, there was only the advertisements. Most of them only said that there was only room for 300 people to work. Okay, and they were told that the opportunity was to help rebuild Britain and its major industries. And as you notice, they picked up mostly. Let me go back here. Picked up mostly Jamaicans, right? I think they had the biggest total. Yes, 793 out of Jamaica. They had the most by a long shot, right? So it's primarily Jamaicans. And so now they made that journey. Wow. So some of them who went had served in the military, in the Allied forces, as they called it. Some men and women. And some wanted to rejoin the armed services, and most just wanted a better career opportunity in Britain. Of course, because there was high unemployment in the islands, right? They weren't doing as much tourism, and they weren't as really, I shouldn't say it like that. What I should say is that because of the war, there hadn't been as much tourism, because before that, the British, and in particular, since it was they had the hold on the place. You know, they had that was one of the playgrounds. Interestingly enough, You didn't see a stop in the Bahamas. And the Bahamas was very much a British territory. So, um, eventually they got uh, to Great Britain, a big ship. I want you to take a look at the ship for a minute because it was huge. And remember, it had over 1,000 people there from the Caribbean, and I include Mexico because they stopped in Mexico. I had no idea that they stopped in Mexico from my limited knowledge about it. But finally, it docks in Tilbury, Tilbury in Essex. So they had all these people coming, and you would think that they would be prepared for them. In fact, you had people leaving their homes to come to Great Britain. Some had been away from home before, like I say, in the military, but most had not. All they knew is that they were getting the opportunity to go to England, go to Britain. So they get to the docks, and in a way, it was kind of, yeah, hectic, okay? Get all these people from various places. And they had what they call the colonial office was charged with helping people find somewhere to stay. One of the places they housed people was in a deep air raid shelter. um, Now, I've been to London several times. The first time I went down into the tubes. That's what they call their subway. Call them the tubes. And I went one time because the tubes is basically they were the air raid shelters, and literally you go down these steps, which is damn near straight down into the tubes, and that's what they look like, tubes. That was so paranoia for me. Paranoid, I guess, is the word I just made up. But it was just you went down these stairs, and it just made me so claustrophobic. That's what I really want to say, claustrophobic. Um, and that was the only time I did that. I got out of there. When I got out of there, I was done. Um, but anyway, they had these different air raid shelters, so they put some in there, and then they had what they call labor exchanges. These are like um, um, temporary job agencies. One was in an area called Brixton, and Brixton became one of the areas that just they most of the especially the Jamaicans, they basically took over Brixton. Years later, they had riots in Brixton. Um, Now, what's important to understand is they brought these people over to help rebuild Britain. So the National Health Service was one of the major sources of employment. That sounds like nurses, right? Nurses and the people to clean up the hospitals and all of that, right? Others worked in factories and mills. The largest employer was London Transport. That's like the transportation industry. Um, Here's the thing. One of the things that even though some of the passengers said they only intended to stay for a short while, um, but they were prepared to stay as long as they were needed. And one of the things that happened was that the British government gave them all British citizenship. Right? This is important to understand because it comes back. And the reason why I called this session today stateless, stateless, meaning without citizenship. So the British government gave them citizenship. I'm going to show you some stuff in a few minutes where it talks about that. Um, and they basically settled in and became citizens and working, all right, and living all over. Okay. Um, let's look at where they went. Where they went. Because they didn't just jump out and, just stay all in London. They stayed in Liverpool, Birmingham, Manchester, Plymouth, Bristol, Birkenhead, Leeds, Colchester, Bolton, Gillingham. But the majority stayed in London, and spread out everywhere else. In like 100, they didn't say where they were going. All right. They also, these are some of the skills they had. Let's look at that. I'm gonna break it down if you can't see it. If you have your screen on full, you can see it. Okay. All right. Look at this. Now these are the skills they said they had. The biggest category after other was housing domestic. Okay. Look at it this way. In Great Britain, these Jamaicans and Bermudians and different folks, even Mexicans, the Cubans, they all came over. And the biggest group of specifics was domestics. Sound familiar? Like here? Here in the United States, it was a big thing for many years when I was growing up. Haitians came over and they were domestics and laborers. Men were laborers, and a certain number of them, it seems to me, when I was a kid, they were also in the hospitals, maybe as nurses or something. But later on, that changed. But I just know that they were domestics because you had some black people, or Negroes back then, who were very proud to say that they had a domestic. They had a maid, and their maids 9 times out of 10 were Haitians. Now, the thing about it that was so ugly was that these Negroes in the United States had the nerve to feel that they were better than those Haitians who they paid like the white women paid black women coming out of slavery when they were domestics. And I know about that. I had a grandparent who, a relative who worked as a domestic in the South, and they washed the clothes and cleaned the house. It was just like, in my mind, it was like slavery. And they paid them like $5 or $10 a week. I was like, what the heck? So they were doing the same thing over there. Only they brought theirs in. They made it. Wait, here's what's so cold. They got the Jamaicans and the Mexicans and the Cubans and the Bermudians to pay to come over there. All right, there's some mechanics and carpenters, clerks and tailors and students and welders and engineers, cabinet makers, some scholars, some machinists, some fitters, some electricians, civil servants, shoemakers, and a few other things, right? So they came over there and they were living there. Now, again, let me mention this. The British Nationality Act of 1948, it created the status of citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies. Understand that. Citizens of the United Kingdom and the colonies. Now, what's the United Kingdom? The United Kingdom is England and Ireland and all of them islands over there. Where's the one that the guy who played James Bond first? Uh, he wasn't from Ireland and Scotland. Scotland. See, all of that's part of the kingdom. Scotland and England and Ireland and I think something else is over there too. And then they had the colonies. So they made all of the colonies, they made them citizens too. Sort of like what the United States did with Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not a state, but they made all the people in Puerto Rico citizens of the United States. That ain't weird, right? So I want you to watch this real quick about some of the information I talked about, but I want you to get this in your head of what they were doing. Okay? Because now understand they made them citizens, right? Yeah.
2018 marks 70 years since HMT Empire Windrush docked in the Essex town of Tilbury, carrying 492 Caribbean passengers. Encouraged by a newspaper advertisement offering cheap transport, hundreds of Jamaicans made the trip to the country they had fought for in the Second World War in the hope of finding work. The UK faced a labour shortage following the devastation wrought by the war, and the passing of the British Nationality Act in 1948 gave Caribbean and other Commonwealth peoples British citizenship and full rights of entry and settlement. The images of West Indians disembarking the Windrush have come to symbolise the beginning of British multiculturalism, with those who arrived in the UK in the late 1940s often referred to as the Windrush generation. This wave of newcomers faced social and economic exclusion upon arrival and were regularly denied private employment and accommodation on the basis of race. Over the following years, the Caribbean community often faced racial prejudice and violence, and during the 1960s and 1970s, the government passed new legislation to impose stricter immigration controls. The 1971 Immigration Act restricted primary immigration to the UK, but allowed Commonwealth citizens already in the country indefinite leave to remain. However, the Home Office did not issue paperwork confirming the status of those who arrived before 1971, leaving a number of the Windrush generation in 2018 facing the prospect of deportation from the country they have called home for decades.
Yeah, they did some snaky stuff. Now here's what they did. Okay, after all those decades of being there in the United Kingdom, and they had gone through a lot of stuff, right? Prejudice and racism, but they had stuck to it and worked hard. Okay? It got down to the 1970s and 80s, and they started having some issues about too many immigrants. Too many immigrants. Now, this is where it starts to sound like here, don't it? So they started pushing for them to leave. And since they were considered citizens, right, you can't tell them to just leave. So here's what they did. They passed the act in 1971, and this, is to say that they could stay, right? That they were still citizens. But what they didn't do was give them any paperwork. They didn't give them nothing on paper. They just said it. And then years later, they started telling them, well, if you can't prove that you're a citizen, then now you're an illegal alien or illegal. Did you just hear what I just said? Look, right now today in the United States, black people are supposedly citizens, but can you prove it? Can you prove that you're a citizen? Well, Let's see. I got a driver's license. That just proves you got a driver's license. I got a birth certificate. Okay, that just proves you were born here. But what do you have that proves you're a citizen? Whoa, buddy. Now we start getting into some stuff here in the United States. What proof do you have that you're a citizen? Well, let me see. I've been here all my life. Ain't been nowhere else. That don't prove nothing, just proves that you're a resident. So in the United Kingdom, what started happening was that they started telling these illegals, all these thousands of illegals who were suddenly illegals because they had no paperwork to prove that they were citizens. And now you got their children, right? Their children have nothing either. Why? Because their parents got nothing on paper, and now the children have nothing on paper. So they started this campaign. It was called Operation Vacant. And they put these vans out with these signs on them saying, in the UK illegally, go home or face arrest. Now, what they were saying was that we'll help you go home. Now, for these children of the Windrush generation, that was their home. They had never been to Jamaica or Bermuda or Cuba or Mexico. They were born in the United Kingdom. This is ugly, y'all. This is ugly. Now all of a sudden they're being told that they are illegals. To show you how deep this got, I want you to watch this video here. Wow. So let's see where we are now. They've declared all these people to be illegal if they can't prove if they don't have any papers, no papers, right? And Ms. Drea, you called it right. The one way you can prove you're a citizen here in the United States is if you have a passport. That proves that you have citizenship. A driver's license does not mean you have citizenship, believe it or not. Because there's a lot of people think that because they got a state ID or they got a driver's license that proves they have a citizenship. No, it just means you can drive, or if you just got a state ID, you can walk around, but it doesn't prove you have citizenship. Having a birth certificate does not guarantee that you're going to be able to prove that you have citizenship. It just proves you were born here. And believe it or not, that's not considered a valid form of ID. You need to have it to get a valid form of ID. Like if you send for your passport, you have to physically send your birth certificate. And it can't just be a copy. It has to be a birth certificate that has a seal on it. Okay? Now you use that to get a passport, which proves you have citizenship. Now, in Great Britain, when they started this whole mess with the Windrush people who now don't have the paperwork, but not just for them, but for their children who were born there and raised there. Okay? And they tried to get them to self-deport, right? To go home voluntarily, even though that wasn't home for them, especially for the children. And for a lot of the Windrush, they hadn't been back in 50 years. And they started a whole thing all across Great Britain, like they're doing here with the illegal immigrants, calling them illegals. Okay? Show you how cold it was. Self-deport. Ain't that something? See, there's a lady got her passport, right? So she cool. Tell you about Oh, let you see this real quick. This is deep.
Hello.
Hello, Dad. You okay?
Yes, darling.
Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm coming up. Chicken.
Samantha's in constant touch with her dad, but for now contact can't get any closer than this.
Did the doctor come and see you today?
Clayton Barnes arrived in Britain in the late 50s. He even had a British passport. But after visiting Jamaica in 2013, he was refused the right to return. Now ill in hospital, he may never be able to.
My biggest fear, that I will get a phone call and that's it. And I don't want that to happen. I want to be able to say face-to-face goodbye, like most people want to be able to say face-to-face goodbye to their, to their family, to their loved ones.
Her dad worked here as a roofer for 5 decades, paying into the system, but now unable to get anything out. His care abroad costs £1,000 a month, as his family now waits to see if they'll get any compensation from the British government.
Looks a bit like Eddie Murphy. He needs to be with his family. I can't speak now. If he's not able to come back in the country, at least I could pay for him to have a healthy, his medication that he's got out there.
Today, the Prime Minister was filling a hole rather than digging one, planting a tree with her Australian counterpart after apologising to other Commonwealth leaders and promising compensation to Windrush migrants, with the details due next week.
So this is in 21st of March 1936.
Clayton's family found some hope today in the National Archives, where we discovered records of his arrival, documents which could help many migrants prove their cases. As Samantha keeps faith, her dad will arrive here once more. Paul Brandt, ITV News.
Wow. Now you see what happened to him? He went home to Jamaica, he went to visit. And then they refused to let him come back. They canceled his passport, canceled his citizenship. So now he can't get back to get his medical care, right? Let me tell you about Jocelyn John. Jocelyn John arrived in London in 1963 at the age of 4. She came there with her mother on a Grenadian passport as a British subject, okay? See, we didn't even see them stop in Grenada, but apparently she got on with her mother somewhere else, I don't know. But she came there on a Grenadian passport as a British subject. She went to primary and secondary school in Hammersmith, West London, before working in hotels. She worked including at the Ritz and at a Hilton. So she was doing what they call it, well, basically domestic, right? Now, sometime around 2009, she lost her Grenadian passport, and that contained a stamp giving her indefinite leave to stay. She had trouble getting a new passport because her mother had married and changed her daughter's name from Mitchell to John. She never registered the change, and that made a discrepancy between Jocelyn's birth certificate and a name she had used all of her adult life. Now, she spent several years trying to sort out her papers, but by 2014, at age 55, she had been classified as living in Britain illegally. She lost her job and was unable to find new work, because once you're declared an illegal, you can't work, you can't get medical care, and you also can't rent a place to live. So for a time, she lived in a homeless hostel, and then she lost her bed because the government does not fund places for people classified as illegal immigrants. She spent 2 years staying with relatives, sleeping on the sofas or even on the floor. Now, in that time period, she managed to gather 75 pages of evidence proving she had spent a lifetime in the United Kingdom. Bank statements, dentist records, medical files, tax records, letters from her primary school, letters from friends and family, but that was not enough. And every letter she got from the Home Office, that's what they called it there. It's like here they call it, what, Homeland Security. They warned her that she was liable to be deported to Grenada, a country she had left more than 50 years ago. So now when they had this voluntary deal of volunteering to go home, because she's frustrated, and she's trying to figure out what should she do. She done tried everything to prove that she was a citizen and that she had been there. Now she's afraid of being arrested and detained. So she looked at going home voluntarily. Because what they said was that this way we'll book you a ticket and you won't have to get arrested and be in detention until we kick you out. It's a much more dignified way of going home. So what she did, she agreed to go to them and say, okay, send me home. Because now she's broke. She didn't borrow money from her family, staying with the family. She can't no longer do that. So finally in November 2016, she decided to go to the Home Office and say, okay, send me home. Send me back to Grenada, where I haven't been for 50 years. They gave her a plane ticket and sent her back to Grenada, and that's where she was staying. Okay? Finally, in July of 2018, 2 years later, they sent her a plane ticket to come back to England. So now, in a way, she's happy because she gets to go back where she spent her whole life. When she gets back to England, now she was able to get a house, get somewhere to live. So she got a flat, as they called it. They gave her an apartment, but it was empty. Okay, and it was outside London, far away from her family. And the council who had set this up didn't give her any furniture. Friends gave her a bed and some chairs, but it was several months before she could get a refrigerator. Remember, she has no money. In late 2018, she got a letter of apology from the Home Secretary, the Home Office. And they said, oh, we sorry. She said, well, what good is a letter of apology now? They ruined my life completely. I came back from nothing. I have had to start rebuilding my life from scratch at the age of 58. She said, now, she said, before this, I felt British. I just did. She said, I am the type of person who would watch every royal wedding on TV. I feel less British now. I feel like I don't belong here and I don't belong there. Now, even though the government said they had a compensation plan, over there they call it a scheme, compensation scheme, most of the Windrush generation or their children has yet to get any money. They've apologized, and about 6,000 of them have been given documents confirming their right to live in the UK, but many have not. And she still has not got a passport because she can't afford the fee. So she's still afraid because without the passport, they could pick her up in a sweep, and next thing you know, they'll be done deported her. So, I mean, there's so many parallels to what's going on here that's not even funny. All right, here, check this one out.
My name is Jay. My mother is a part of the Windrush generation. I was born in the UK and lived here all my life, and I'm recognised as a stateless citizen. I noticed there was a problem when my foster family wanted to take us away when we were children, and we couldn't go because we never had the right relevant documents, even though we was in the local authority. It's hindered me quite a lot because I haven't been able to, as I wanted to, complete certain business goals and competitions that I would have needed to have done in my career to develop me further. So it's kind of made me feel very stuck where I am and very isolated at times, very alone, depressed, and that's how it's made me feel. At one stage they did say that if I didn't sort out a status, they were going to send me back to my home country of Jamaica, yes. I've never visited Jamaica, I've never been on a holiday to Jamaica. I phoned everyone. I was like, I'm going, guys. It was quite hard for me because you never know with these situations, and it was actually very hard. You know, I even think now with what's going on, the change of government and Brexit, am I okay? Like, am I gonna be okay? It feels quite embarrassing to be classed as a stateless person. It's almost degrading. If you don't sort out the status, you can be detained until you sort something out. You could be deported if you don't sort your papers out. So these things have worried me. You know, I've lost sleep, depression, and just been isolated because of it. My name is Jay. My mother is a part of the Windrush generation.
Your work colleague, it's atrocious that this could be happening in the modern age. It smacks of colonialism, of slavery, that this should be happening at a time when Britain has been embroiled in a scandal over the Windrush generation.
This is a brilliant start to the fight back, but also I'm here today because I am absolutely sick and tired of the racist rhetoric and the policies that are coming out of the government that we have today. I mean, they're absolutely in crisis, yet they're not pulling away from the thing that's actually disastrous for them, and that's attacking communities like the Windrush community, who have played an integral part in building this country.
And any minute they could just come and said, we no longer want you, and send me back to Jamaica. So I think it's wrong. Not that I'd mind going back to Jamaica, but I want to go on my terms, not for Theresa May and her henchmen to say, go.
Your work colleague.
Wow. Tell you about one more story. His name is Dexter Bristol. They had his funeral, well, they had his funeral at a crematorium because he was, they cremated him because he died suddenly following a 10-month battle to prove he was not an illegal immigrant. He spent 50 of his 58 years in England, had always been a British citizen, and he ended up, well, let's put it this way. He is from Grenada. He was born a British subject. This is one of the killing things. At the age of 8, moved to the UK in 1968 with his mother, who was working as a National Health Service nurse. Spent the rest of his life in Britain. Now, when this whole process of proving your citizenship came up, he had no passport, and he was unable to prove he was in the country legally. So he lost his job And then he wasn't able to claim any benefits because he had no way to prove he was a citizen. And so he died because he couldn't get proper medical care. You see, here's the cold part. As I mentioned earlier, how do you prove you're a citizen? And as my good friend Ms. Drea mentioned in a few minutes ago, said passport. And I know because she has one that's allowed her to go out of the country and get back in. But very few of us have passports. And they're making it more challenging to get one. And just to show you how deep they are, for those who think that their driver's license is the same, it's not. In fact, in most states, in fact, all the states, you have to have a special kind of driver's license or state ID that will allow you to fly or to get in any federal installation. That means even federal buildings. And that's because they're putting the driver's licenses applications through a special process to determine for sure that you were born here or that you're eligible to be to get this driver's license. So here's the deal. We could become non-citizens tomorrow. You could find that you want to go somewhere and all of a sudden they're saying, well, you can only go if you're a citizen. I want to go from Illinois to Indiana. They put up federal barriers. Now all of a sudden they're saying, you can't go there unless you can prove you're here legally. Prove you're a citizen. And I think the coldest thing I learned about the British when they did this was how they declared all big time, y'all can stay. All of y'all that came here in Windrush in 1948, and all of y'all that came during that time period, you can stay, but we ain't giving you nothing on paper. And that's what I want to really, really get across here is and it doesn't even matter where you are. Do you know, and they make you stateless. Do you know what happens to you if you become stateless? What happens, you see what happened there. They couldn't get medical care, they couldn't work, they couldn't rent anywhere to stay. In the United States, if you're stateless, meaning if you don't have a passport, let's say that you get your driver's license declared not enough to prove you're a citizen. Okay? And that's the key thing here. We're dealing with a government administration that might declare anything. You see what they're doing to so-called illegal immigrants now, although they're focused on South Americans, including Mexicans, even though Mexicans are part of North America. We are facing a time period like we have never seen before. And things that we take for granted, we can't take for granted. So the first thing I would say is get your passport. That gives you some measure, okay? At least with your passport, if it became necessary to leave here and go somewhere else, you can go. Let's say if you decided that you want to go to Ghana where they offer citizenship for you in Ghana. At least if you have your passport, you can go and get in. See, if you try to leave here without a passport, you're stateless. No other country will let you in. And that's what statelessness means. It means you are a non-citizen on the planet Earth. you can't go nowhere, or you can't get in nowhere. And if you leave here without it, you can't get back in. You become stateless. Citizenship. We need to understand what that means. Citizenship. And I implore you, ask your family members, do they know what citizenship is? Ask your neighbors, your friends, do they know what citizenship is? And ask them, can they prove it? Can they prove that they're a citizen? You'd be amazed. You'd be amazed. You know, it's like when we say all the time, I'm American. Canadians are Americans. Guatemalans are Americans, because there's North and South America. We have just usurped the word American and made it just to mean just the United States. But you're supposed to be a citizen of the United States of America. Can you prove it? All right, I'm done. I think I've raised enough questions in your mind. And I say, look, as I said earlier, how many of us were aware of what all was going on in Great Britain and still going on to this day? See, because the news here, if you go back and think about it, if you're a news hawk, you heard hardly anything about this. And they were deporting people like crazy. Black people. All right. I'm gone for now. Thank you so much. And as always, no justice, no peace, no love. KNOW.